The day I understood the real truth about my son was the day I stood alone in the middle of Nashville International Airport, with nothing but my old leather purse and my aching bones. No luggage, no ticket, no money, no one. Just the sound of my own heartbeat, and the noise of strangers rushing past me like I was a piece of furniture someone had left behind. I was 71 years old, standing under those big, bright airport lights, and my legs were shaking. Not from fear, but from something much heavier than fear. It was the kind of pain that doesn't make a sound, the kind that settles deep in your chest and just sits there. My name is Marielle Carr. I was born and raised right here in Tennessee, and I have spent every single day of my life trying to do right by the people I love. I raised my son with everything I had. I cooked his meals when he was sick. I prayed over him every night before he could even spell his own name. I went without things so he could have things. And on that cold February morning, that same son looked me square in the eyes, lifted one shoulder in a lazy shrug, and said, "Mama, if you need bus fare, sell your phone." Then he turned his back on me. His wife, Kishana Bush, was 2 steps behind him, her carry-on bag on her shoulder, and her eyes pointed at the floor. She never looked back, not once. They walked through those sliding glass doors and disappeared into the security line like I had never existed. Like I had never mattered at all. Like 71 years of a good woman's life meant absolutely nothing. I stood in that terminal for a long time. Long enough for the tears to come, and long enough for those same tears to dry. And then, slowly, something shifted inside of me. Something quiet and strong settled into my bones. Something made up its mind. But before I tell you what happened next, I need to take you all the way back to where this story really began. Because it didn't begin at that airport. It began on a Sunday afternoon in my kitchen, with sweet potato pie on the table and a smile I should have never trusted. My husband, Earl Carr, left this world 3 years before any of this happened. He passed from a stroke on a Thursday evening in May, and I will tell you honestly, there is a silence that moves into a house when your partner of 47 years is gone. It doesn't leave. You just learn to live around it. Earl was not a fancy man. He didn't talk much and he didn't brag. But he worked hard every single day of his life, and he made sure I was taken care of. He left me our home, a beautiful 3-bedroom house sitting on 12 acres of Tennessee farmland that had been in our family for 2 generations. He left me a savings account. He left me investment portfolios that his longtime attorney, a wise and careful man named Jalal Gray, had helped us build over many years together. And most of all, Earl Carr left me a name that stood for something in this community. After Earl passed, I grieved the way a person is supposed to grieve, fully, honestly, and without rushing. My friends held me up. Women like you, Sarah Willis, who lived just down the road and would come sit with me on the porch in the evenings without me ever having to ask. And Tykeria Saunders, my oldest friend, who had known me since the 3rd grade and could always feel when something was wrong before I even opened my mouth. Those women were my lifeline. They brought food. They prayed with me. They stayed. Slowly, I found my footing again. I tended my garden. I fed the birds that came to Earl's old wooden feeder by the window every morning. I read my Bible. I joined a sewing circle at the church. I was okay. I was at peace. My life was quiet, but it was mine, and it was full of goodness. My son Hampton Gamble lived about 4 hours away in Memphis with his wife, Kishana Bush. I want to be fair when I speak about Hampton, because fairness is something I believe in even when it hurts. He was my only child, and I loved him the way a mother loves, without condition and without ceiling. But Hampton had always had a habit of appearing in my life mostly when he wanted something. His visits were warm but short. His phone calls came around birthdays and sometimes around the end of the month. I noticed. I always noticed, but I told myself every single time that this was just how some grown children were, and that deep down, he still loved me. A mother will tell herself anything to keep that hope alive. So when Hampton pulled into my driveway that October Sunday, with Kishana and their 2 little ones, all of them smiling, I felt my heart lift right up. Kishana had her hair done up pretty, and she hugged me at the door like she truly meant it. Hampton helped himself to my refrigerator before he even sat down, which was his way, and I didn't mind it one bit that day. I made sweet potato pie and put on a fresh pot of coffee, and we sat around my kitchen table, and for a little while, it felt like family was supposed to feel warm and real. It was Hampton who brought it up, the way Hampton always brought things up, slowly and sweetly, like he was doing you a favor. "Mama," he said, leaning back in his chair with that easy smile, "we've been talking, and we want to do something real nice. A family vacation. All of us together. Down to Cancun. Warm beaches, good food, sunshine every day. You haven't been anywhere since Daddy passed. You deserve to get away, Mama. You really do." I looked at him, then at Kishana, who was nodding her head with wide, encouraging eyes. "Cancun?" I said, setting down my fork. "Yes, ma'am," Kishana said, her voice soft as silk. "We already found the resort. It's beautiful. You'd have your own room and your own private balcony facing the ocean. The grandkids would love it, and you and I could sit by the pool and just relax. You deserve to be pampered, Mom." She called me Mom. She always said that word at the exact right moment. I told them I would think about it, but Hampton kept talking, painting pictures with his words the way he had always been good at. Warm water and laughing grandchildren and evening sunsets and all of us sitting together with nothing to worry about. And every time I seemed uncertain, Kishana would lean forward and touch my hand and say something sweet. By the time the pie was gone and the coffee was cold, I had talked myself right into it. I said yes. What happened next came on slowly, the way trouble usually does. Not all at once, but piece by piece, until you look up one day and realize you have been walking in the wrong direction for a very long time. Hampton explained that money was a little tight that month. He said the vacation package was a real good deal, but it required everyone to put in their share. He said if I could contribute $3,000 or $4,000 up front, he would handle all the bookings himself and cover everything else. He said he would take care of all of it. I should have asked to see the booking confirmations. I should have insisted on putting my own name on my own ticket. I should have asked many, many questions. Instead, I told him that I didn't have that kind of cash on hand without touching my savings. And that was when Hampton got quiet in that particular way of his. Not angry, just thoughtful. And he said, "Mama, Daddy's old tools are sitting out in that barn collecting dust. His truck hasn't moved since the day he passed. You don't have to hold on to all that forever. Those things could give you a good sum of money and let you enjoy your life." That's what Daddy would have wanted. Those words landed somewhere tender, because part of me knew he was using them, but another part of me, the part that missed Earl so badly some mornings that I could barely breathe, wanted to believe that enjoying life was exactly what Earl would have wanted for me. My neighbor Sarah Willis came by the following Saturday while I had the barn door open and some of Earl's things laid out in the yard. She stood there with her arms folded, watching me with those steady eyes of hers, and she said, "Marielle, are you certain about what you're doing here?" I told her Hampton needed me to help fund a family trip. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she said carefully, "Honey, I want you to think hard about something. Is Hampton asking you to come on a trip, or is he asking you for your money?" I told her she was worrying over nothing. I told her Hampton was my son, and that family had to trust each other. She didn't push me, but she stood there watching with those worried eyes until I had everything loaded up for the sale, and that look stayed in my memory long after she went home. I sold Earl's woodworking tools, his old riding mower, 2 sets of fishing equipment he had treasured, and a beautiful silver pocket watch that his own father had given him. I raised $3,800. I put every single cent of it into Hampton's hand the very next week. He folded it into his jacket pocket, gave me a quick hug, and said, "We leave in 3 weeks, Mama. Start packing." Those 3 weeks felt like something good was on its way. I ironed my best blouses and folded them into my suitcase. I bought myself a new pair of sandals, the kind with the cushioned soles, because my feet aren't young anymore. I called Takaria Saunders and told her all about the trip, and she laughed her big, full laugh and said, "Marielle Carr, you deserve every ray of sunshine God has up there." Even Sarah came around to help me pack, though she stayed quieter than usual, pressing my clothes flat with her hands, like each fold was a small prayer. The morning we left, Hampton and Kishana arrived before the sun came up. They loaded my bags into the trunk without much conversation. The drive to the airport was long and strangely quiet. Kishana sat up front with her eyes on her phone. Hampton drove with both hands on the wheel and didn't turn on the radio. I noticed the grandchildren were not in the car and asked about them. Hampton said they were staying with a cousin. I thought that was odd, since the whole trip had been described as a family vacation, but I kept my thoughts to myself and watched the sky turn pink as we got closer to the city. At the airport, Hampton said he would handle all the check-in for all three of us. I thanked him and sat down near the big windows overlooking the runway, my purse in my lap, watching the planes lift themselves into the pale morning light. I sat there for a good while, telling myself that maybe Hampton really had changed, that maybe this trip was the beginning of something new between us. Then I walked up to the airline counter to ask about my boarding pass. The young agent at the desk looked at her screen, then looked at me, and a small frown crossed her face. "Ma'am," she said gently, "this ticket has been voided." "I'm sorry," I said. "The ticket in your name, it was canceled this morning." She hesitated, then added, "And your luggage, ma'am. It was checked in under a different name." I turned around slowly. Hampton was standing near the doors to the security line, about 20 feet away, his bag already on his shoulder. Kishana was right beside him, looking at the floor. Neither of them was moving toward me. "Hampton." My voice came out steady. I do not know to this day how it came out so steady. He walked toward me, but his face was already decided, already done. "Mama," he said, low and flat. "The budget got tight. There wasn't enough room. It just didn't work out. You can get the bus home. It's not that bad." "Hampton," I said again, slower this time. "I gave you everything I had. I sold your father's things." He didn't flinch, not even a little. "Sell your phone, Mama," he said. "That'll get you bus fare." And then my son turned his back on me for the last time. Kishana Bush followed him without a word. They walked through the security doors and they were gone. I stood there in the middle of that busy, noisy, rushing terminal, completely alone, and I made myself breathe. In and out. In and out. I looked down at my phone in my hand, the one he had just told me to sell, and I knew exactly who I was going to call. The phone was still warm in my hand when I found a quiet corner of that terminal, lowered myself into one of those hard plastic chairs, and scrolled to a number I had not needed to call in a long time. Jalal Gray, Earl's attorney, our attorney, a man who had sat across from my husband for nearly 30 years, handled every important document our family had ever put their names on, and never once made us feel like anything less than people who mattered. I found his name in my contacts, and I pressed call before I could talk myself into something smaller. It rang twice. Then his voice came through, steady, professional, and familiar in a way that made my chest loosen just a little. "Jalal Gray speaking." I took one breath. "Mr. Gray," I said, "this is Marielle Carr, Earl's wife." He knew exactly who I was before I had finished the sentence. "Mrs. Carr," he said warmly, "it's always good to hear from you. How are you holding up these days?" "I am at Nashville International Airport," I told him, "and I am in some trouble. Not trouble I caused, but trouble I need help getting out of." There was a pause, short but full of weight, and then his voice shifted. It became focused and sharp, the way a good attorney sounds when he has understood that something serious is happening and he is already thinking 3 steps ahead. "Tell me everything," he said. So I told him. I told him about the Sunday afternoon in my kitchen, about the sweet potato pie and the big smiles and the talk of Cancun. I told him about the money I handed over to Hampton, about Earl's tools and his fishing equipment, and that beautiful silver pocket watch that had belonged to Earl's own father. I told him about the 3 weeks of packing and hoping, and telling myself that maybe this time things were different. I told him about the silent drive to the airport and the strange, heavy quiet in that car. And then I told him about the airline counter, the voided ticket, the luggage checked under another name, and the words my son had spoken to me before he turned his back and walked away. I told it all flat and calm, because my crying was already done, and what I needed now was not comfort. What I needed was clarity. When I finished, Jalal Gray was quiet for a long moment. "Mrs. Carr," he said at last, and his voice carried something I recognized as controlled anger being held very carefully behind professional calm. "I want you to stay exactly where you are. Do not move. I am going to send someone to bring you to my office, and when you arrive, We are going to take care of everything. Every single thing. Do you understand me? I said I understood. And Mrs. Carr, he added, just before he ended the call, I am deeply sorry this happened to you. Earl was a good man. You deserved better than this. That sentence nearly broke something open in me, but I held myself together. I sat in that hard plastic chair in the middle of Nashville International Airport, watching strangers live their ordinary lives all around me. Couples arguing over gate numbers, children dragging rolling suitcases, business people staring at laptops, and I kept my back straight and my chin up. I was not going to let anyone walking past see Marielle Carr shattered. I was going to let them see Marielle Carr waiting, because that was exactly what I was doing. I was waiting for the next chapter of my life to begin. It was a young man named Rakeem Cummings, a quiet, well-dressed associate from Jalal's office, who came to collect me from the airport about an hour later. He was polite and unhurried, and he did not ask me a single question on the drive over, which I was more grateful for than I could say. He simply drove, and I sat in the back seat watching Tennessee roll past the window. The flat open land, the thin winter trees, the pale morning sky. And I thought about Earl. I thought about the farmland he had loved. I thought about the house he had built for us with his own hands and his father's hands before him. I thought about every long evening we had sat on that front porch together, saying nothing, saying everything. And I thought, not 1 inch of it was going to Hampton. Not 1 acre, not $1. Not one single thing Earl Carr had worked his whole life to build was going to a son who had told his own mother to sell her phone for bus fare. Jalal Gray's office was warm and smelled like old wood and strong coffee. He stood up from behind his desk when I walked in. A small thing, but it meant something to a woman who had just been made to feel invisible. He shook my hand with both of his, settled me into a good chair, and set a cup of hot tea on the table beside me without being asked, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Then he sat down across from me, folded his hands on the desk, and said, "Now, Mrs. Carr, let us talk about your estate." We talked for nearly 2 hours. I told him exactly what I wanted, and he listened to every word the way a person listens when they are truly paying attention, not waiting for their turn to speak, but actually hearing you. I told him I wanted Hampton Gamble and Keshana Bush removed from my will completely. Not reduced, not penalized with a smaller share. Removed entirely, as though they had never been written in. I told him I wanted my house, my farmland, my investment accounts, and everything else that bore my name to go to a nonprofit organization dedicated to finding safe housing and legal protection for elderly people who had been abandoned or taken advantage of by their own families. Jalal already knew of exactly the right organization, a well-run, well-respected group working right there in Tennessee, with real people doing real work for seniors who had nowhere else to turn. He told me about them carefully and honestly, the way he told me about everything. And the more he talked, the more certain I became that this was the right thing. This was exactly the right thing. I signed the new documents that same afternoon. Perel's hands did not shake. My heart did not waver. My name went down on those papers with the same steadiness it had always had. And when I set the pen down, something inside me felt lighter than it had in months, maybe years. Jalal looked at me across that wide desk when it was done, and he said quietly, "Mrs. Carr, what you have done here is not just legally sound, it is right. Earl always told me you were the wisest person he had ever known." I thanked him, and then I asked Rakeem Cummings to drive me home. The house was exactly as I had left it that morning, quiet and still, and full of Earl's presence in every corner, the way an old house carries the people who loved it. I stood in the front doorway for a long moment just breathing it in. The smell of old wood and my garden soap, and the faint trace of Earl's aftershave that I was almost certain I had imagined every day for 3 years now, but that somehow never completely left. I walked through each room slowly, and I let myself feel everything there was to feel. The kitchen where I had cooked 10,000 meals. The living room where Earl had sat in his chair by the window every evening reading the newspaper until his eyes got too tired. The back hallway where Hampton's old-school pictures still hung in cheap frames I had never gotten around to replacing. I looked at those pictures for a long time. I looked at the little boy in them, the gap-toothed smile, the Sunday shirt, the ears he had not grown into yet. I had loved that boy with everything I had. I still did. That was the part that people might not understand, and I will tell you it plainly so there is no confusion. I did not do what I did out of hatred. I did it out of wisdom, because love without boundaries is not love. It is an open door that anyone can walk through and take what they please. And I was done leaving my door open for people who had shown me exactly who they were. I packed only what truly mattered to me. My Bible, worn soft at the spine from 40 years of mornings. Earl's favorite photograph of us together. The one taken on our 25th anniversary at a park in Chattanooga, where I was laughing at something he had just said, and he was looking at me with that look he always had, like I was the best surprise he had ever gotten. My mother's hand-stitched quilts, my best clothes, my sewing kit, and the little collection of ceramic bird figurines I had gathered over 4 decades. One for each place Earl and I had traveled together, from Gatlinburg to New Orleans, to a little seaside town in South Carolina, whose name I could never quite spell right. 2 bags and 1 cardboard box. That was all I needed. I called Sarah Willis. When she pulled into my driveway and walked through the front door, I told her everything, sitting across from her at that kitchen table, the same way we had sat across from each other 100 times before. She listened to every word without interrupting, and when I was done, she reached across the table and took both of my hands in both of hers. "I am not one bit surprised," she said, "and I am so very sorry. And Marielle Carr, I am more proud of you than I know how to say." I told her I was moving. I had already looked into a senior living community called Meadow Crest, situated on a beautiful stretch of land about 40 minutes outside the city, the kind of place with wide green lawns and a working garden and a full activities center, and a community of people who had chosen to be there because living together turned out to be better than living alone. Sarah squeezed my hands and told me that sounded like God making something good out of something ugly. Then she helped me carry every bag to the car, and she hugged me for a long time in the driveway, and she told me to call her the moment I got settled. I promised I would, and I meant it. Meadow Crest was nothing like I had expected. I think when most people hear the words senior living, their minds go somewhere dim and sad. Long hallways and fluorescent lights and people in chairs waiting for something that never comes. That was not Meadow Crest. That was not even close to Meadow Crest. The woman who greeted me at the front entrance on my very first morning was named Kanikia Crawford. She had a warm, open face and a laugh that came easily and meant it every single time. And she walked me down to my room herself, like she had all the time in the world. She helped me figure out where my things should go, pointed out the window in my room that looked out directly over the garden, and told me with great seriousness that the breakfast hour ran until 9:30 and that this was information I should protect with my life. I laughed, a real laugh, from somewhere deep, and I felt it move through me like warm water. By the end of my first week, I had met Zanice Hudson, a retired school teacher from Knoxville who had opinions about everything and was almost always right about most of them. She could beat every single person in that building at Scrabble and was not humble about it, which I respected deeply. I had met Perel Barnett, a small, sharp-witted woman from Georgia who kept a journal every morning before breakfast and made the most extraordinary peach preserves I had ever tasted in my 71 years on this earth. She brought me a jar on my 3rd day and told me she always welcomed new neighbors with something sweet, because she believed that was how you set the tone for a friendship. I kept that jar on my windowsill for weeks before I could bring myself to open it, because it was too pretty to disturb. And I had met Bankston Moss, the head groundskeeper at Meadow Crest, a quiet, unhurried, generous man who kept the gardens running through every season, and who always saved a small corner of the planting beds for the residents to tend themselves. When he found out I had farmed my own land for years, he handed me a trowel, pointed to an open patch of good soil, and said, "Plant whatever makes you happy, Mrs. Carr." I planted tomatoes, because Earl had loved them. I planted marigolds along the edge, because they kept the pests away, and because they were cheerful to look at. And I planted one long row of sunflowers, just because Earl had always loved sunflowers, and because I had decided I was going to carry the things he loved with me everywhere I went from now on. Not as grief, but as company. The days filled up with a richness I had not been expecting. Zanice and I played cards on Tuesday and Thursday evenings with a competitive energy that would have surprised people who underestimated 2 older women. Perel and I had a standing Saturday morning breakfast, where we talked about books and memories, and the kinds of things you can only say to someone who is not going to judge you for them. Kanakia organized a monthly talent show that was equal parts genuinely moving and completely, wonderfully ridiculous. And in the garden, with my hands deep in good Tennessee soil and the sun warm on the back of my neck, I felt something growing inside of me that I had almost lost the ability to name. Peace. Real, quiet, honest-to-goodness peace. The kind that does not depend on anyone else to give it to you, and cannot be taken away by anyone either. I called Tycaria Saunders every Sunday without fail, and every Sunday she would say the same thing. Marielle, you sound better every week. And every week, she was right. 6 months passed the way good time passes, not rushing, not dragging, but moving along steady and sweet, the way a river moves when it knows where it is going. The sunflowers had grown tall and proud along the garden edge. The tomatoes had come in heavy and red, and Bankston Moss had said they were the finest ones in the whole bed, which I accepted graciously because I believed him. Zanis had taught me 3 new card games, and I had beaten her at one of them on a Tuesday evening in July, which she did not accept easily, and which had made me laugh harder than I had laughed in longer than I could remember. I was sitting on the back porch at Meadowcrest on a warm August evening, side by side with Perel Barnett in matching rocking chairs, both of us watching the fireflies begin to rise out of the tall grass the way they do in a Tennessee summer, soft and blinking, drifting up into the darkening air like little pieces of a dream. Perel was telling me about a new recipe she was trying, something with peaches and brown sugar and a dash of something she refused to name, and her voice was easy and warm beside me, and the air smelled like honeysuckle and cut grass, and the good richness of a summer evening that has decided to be perfect. And then my phone buzzed on the little side table between our chairs. I looked down at the screen. Hampton Gamble. I looked at that name for a long, quiet moment. The fireflies kept drifting up. Perel's voice continued soft beside me. The sky above the garden had turned that deep blue that comes just before the stars decide to show themselves. And everything around me, every single thing, was exactly as it should be. I reached down, picked up the phone, and turned it off. Then I set it face down on that little table, folded my hands gently in my lap, and turned my face back toward the garden and the fireflies and the wide-open Tennessee sky. And Marielle Carr smiled.